Extermination.
People have been yelling at each other on the internet over changes to their favorite video game franchises for as long as online gaming has existed, and Halo is no different. Halo has been an extremely successful franchise spanning almost 20 years now since the release of Halo Combat Evolved in 2001. But this did not stop Bungie, and later 343, from messing with the sandbox on a game-to-game basis. Some of these changes have been a lot more controversial than others to the community, and some of the most controversial of these changes today is the addition of Sprint and the Spartan abilities. Halo 2 added things like dual wielding to the sandbox, while Halo 3 added in different consumable equipment items placed around the map that you could deploy to turn the tide of battle. Halo Reach was the first Halo, in my opinion, to really mess with the formula in a drastic way, as it added different armor abilities that you could select from depending on the game mode you were playing. These armor abilities included the dreaded Sprint along with some others like Armor Lock. If you ask most people, Halo Reach marked the transition from your classic Halo, i.e. no sprinter abilities, to today's modern Halo, where Sprint and Spartan abilities are a key part of the Halo sandbox. Halo 4 continued the trend that Halo Reach started, and made Sprint standard on all players, along with adding in more COD-like features, like being able to create a loadout that included things like the choice of primary weapon, secondary weapon, grenade type, an armor ability, a tactical package, and a support upgrade along with ordnance drops. This leads us to today, where Halo 5 has backtracked on a lot of the things that many fans perceived Halo 4 did wrong, like armor abilities and the loadouts, while at the same time keeping Sprint and implementing what most players refer to as advanced mobility. This includes the obvious Sprint, along with the ability to thrust, ground pound, Spartan charge, clamber, slide, and hover in midair for a few seconds while aiming. As we anxiously await E3, where we will most likely get more info about Halo Infinite, I, along with many others, wonder whether or not Sprint and the Spartan abilities will make a return to the franchise. Many hope that 343 returns to the classic Halo formula that we all loved from the original trilogy, while others hope 343 continues to experiment with the sandbox and build upon the gameplay from Halo 5. This brings the question, should Halo even return to the classic formula? And that is a question that is extremely hard to pick a side on. The last classic Halo game was Halo 3, which released in 2007, and games as a whole have evolved and innovated over that time period. Does that mean classic Halo would fail in today's market? It's hard to say, but I would argue no. Things like Halo Online have shown there is a market for classic Halo, especially on PC in this day and age. But just because it would not fail does not necessarily mean it would be the best for the franchise as a whole. AAA games today are a huge production. Games take years to make and millions of dollars to produce, so more often than not, developers and publishers follow trends rather than taking huge risks. That's why we end up with 900 different modern military shooters back when COD was the market leader, or then once LoL exploded we got a ton of different MOBAs, and currently we're getting a ton of different Battle Royale games. This time it's a little different because games are able to just implement Battle Royale into their existing franchises. Here are a lot of the common arguments that I see come up whenever people discuss Sprint and the Spartan abilities in Halo. Some person or website usually always runs an article saying something along the lines of, well, at least you can turn off all the things you don't like in custom games, and while technically this is true, it's just kind of a dumb argument. When a game is built from the ground up around certain movement mechanics or abilities, just being able to shut them off is not the same as an entire game built around not having those abilities. Other people argue that the advanced mobility mechanics add a skill ceiling to the game, and again I would say no. Just because you have more things you can click does not necessarily make the skill ceiling in a game higher. Top level players will always find a way to maximize the sandbox they are given, and they will do this regardless of if you can slide and thrust to the side during combat. In my opinion, things like predictability can also contribute to a player's skill level. Being able to know exactly how long it'll take for someone to get from point A to point B is something you can't really do with advanced movement, since people are able to sometimes sprint, sometimes not, sometimes they'll slide, sometimes they won't. It just makes it impossible to know exactly how quickly they will get across the map. Being able to predict a player's movement during a gunfight is also a critical skill, and much more doable in the classic Halo setting, whereas in a game like Halo 5, gunfights get much more hectic with people thrusting all over the place. Another common argument you hear people say is that Sprint speeds up the game, and leads to more eventful and exciting games. I have also heard people argue that going back to large big team battle maps would be terrible without Sprint. To this I would respond that it's not entirely the case. It all comes down to map design. Here's a short clip that the Reddit user Stianobi posted a few years ago comparing the time it takes to get across the maps Heretic in Halo 3 with Truth in Halo 5, which if you don't know, they're both remakes of the Halo 2 map Midship, so it's a perfect way to compare them. As you can see in Halo 5, it actually took longer to get across the map than it did in Halo 3, because the maps are scaled up to account for sprint. If you think about this for a moment, you can see that when maps are scaled up for sprint, it actually slows the game down as a whole, because you can't just sprint around the whole time. You have to stop sprinting in order to fire your guns or regen your shields. Some people always argue that Halo 5 was the fastest and most exciting Halo in the series. But is that really the case, or does it just give off that feeling because you are clicking more things as you traverse the map? Now before people go on and say, well maybe you just didn't like Halo 5 personally. That isn't the case. I thought Halo 5 was a very competent shooter, and the best Halo I had played since 3. I put hundreds of hours into the game, grinding arena, and even trying to compete at points. Halo 5 is probably the most fun I have sunk into a game besides Halo 3 and CSGO. However, just because I liked it, does not mean the series would not benefit from returning to its classic roots. If it was up to me, Halo Infinite would be a return to Halo's roots. But obviously, I am just a random dude on YouTube with no influence over the series. So what do I think will actually happen? Honestly, I think Sprint and Spartan abilities make a return. Possibly some adjustments to things like Ground Pound or Spartan Chars, but overall I do not think the movement mechanics will change drastically again. I think it would be cool to maybe just see Sprint return and lose the thruster, but I doubt that is a change they will make. Today on Reddit I saw someone mention the opposite of that, where just Spartan abilities make a return and Sprint goes away. I'm not totally sure how I feel about that. At the very least it would be interesting, and maybe it is a middle ground that could appease some of the classic Halo purists along with keeping the fans of advanced mobility happy. So all in all, now we just wait and see. Once E3 comes and goes, if we see advanced mobility make its appearance, tons of people on the internet will once again be upset. Whether or not that is just a vocal minority is always hard to tell though. Regardless, I urge everyone to hold off on judgment and just play the game yourself when it comes out. Halo 5 may have not been my dream come true Halo, but it was a much more enjoyable Halo than I thought it would be. I think as long as 343 doesn't pull a Halo 4 on us again, we will have bright days ahead of us as Halo fans, and for that, we should be happy. If you made it to the end of this video, thanks for checking it out. I'd love to hear what you think about Sprint and Halo, so leave a comment on if you want to see it or not in Infinite. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. You can also check out my previous video, which was some of my thoughts on the Master Chief Collection coming to PC. And if you're curious at all what's upcoming on the channel, I'm planning to do a review on Splitgate later this week when it releases. I imagine I'll probably get that out later this week or maybe sometime next week. And then after that, I want to try and do my retrospective on COD 2. And I don't know, that'd probably be early next month. See you next time.